Hello and welcome to our first From Seed to Sky conversations on roots, resilience, and rising. And something that I'm really excited about bringing these conversations is to talk to other teachers, therapists, providers, practitioners, nurses, space holders of all kinds who do the kind of work that can be fraught with burnout and compassion fatigue and trauma and secondary trauma, and just want to talk with other practitioners and providers about how they navigate staying resilient, working with burnout as it comes up when they're working in the field that they work in. So I'm super excited to have Doris Taylor on today for our first episode, I don't know what this is called, conversation. She is an RN and a BSN of MoonShine Wellness, which provides resources for the prevention and getting out of burnout to individuals and businesses. She facilitates workshops and small group discussions around burnout, as well as personal coaching. Her passion around advocating and supporting other nurses drives the mission of creating safe spaces for those working in healthcare. After working in healthcare for 20 years, Doris quit in 2021 due to severe burnout. Starting her career in 2001, she started on the adult Med-Surg floor and was made charge nurse 6 months after graduation with no training. By the end of her first year, she was experiencing burnout and decided to do travel nursing. This part of her career allowed her to experience different hospital and clinical settings in several states along the West Coast. Her staff nurse career ended in a pediatric GI clinic in Seattle, and she currently lives in Seattle with her family. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
I'm really excited to be here, actually, because this is, like I was saying, like this is my jam. Burnout, resilience, like this is, you know, I've experienced it myself very intensely, but these are also the people that I work with. So I love it. I'm really excited to be here.
Yay, yay. So sounds like you've kind of experienced both ends of the spectrum, feeling really resilient and excited and passionate and feeling really burnt out and hard and desperate and tired and exhausted and all the full spectrum of the experience from resilience to burnout. And I certainly have too. And that's actually motivated my own excitement around how do I keep myself resilient, but how do I support others who are doing this work as well?
Mhm.
So what's one daily practice that strengthens your roots, nurtures your resilience, or helps you rise in the face of challenges that might otherwise feel overwhelming?
So the one thing that I do every day, and I notice it when I don't do it. So in 2020, when we went into lockdown and people were picking up hobbies. I have always had an interest in herbs and herbalism, and I took a course on how to make herbal body oil. And that was life changing. So I was still working at a clinic at that time, but just being able to like make your own medicine was a huge thing for me. And I started out with St. John's wort. So I made St. John's wort herbal body oil. And working in a clinic, we sit a lot. We're on the computer, so like your shoulders and your neck and your lower back is super tense and tight. And St. John's wort topically is a nervine, so it relaxes the nerves. And I would like once I kind of started getting into the habit of it, I would use it every day. And so instead of using lotion, I use my herbal body oil, and it was amazing. And so now I still continue to make it. And like I just incorporate into my after shower routine. I do it at the end of the day before I go to bed. And it makes me feel very nourished and supported. It's so different than just using a lotion, right? Like you're taking the properties of the herb and infusing it into oil and then rubbing that oil all over. And I can tell the difference. I ran out a few months ago because I just hadn't strained the oil. And so I didn't use it for a couple months, and I could tell the different, like I can tell my like stress level and tension just increases, and I just don't feel like as in my body as when I do the herbal body oils every day. So it makes such like that's one thing, because you a lot of times people are already using, like, you put lotion on and you use some sort of moisturizer. But
Right.
if make for me, making it as part of my daily routine has is a game changer, because it just helps regulate my nervous system so much differently.
Mhm. Wow. Wow. I love that. I love that it's something small, right? Like something that you can do after your shower and just put it on your body. And it's not just another maintenance thing, but it's
Mhm.
like this care thing. And I'm curious, how did you get into like that? Because I also find that people find like their own unique ways that nourish them. And like for you, it was this particular oil and this particular herb. How did you come to herbalism and plant medicine and oils?
So working in healthcare,
Mhm.
I remember very distinctly, I was working at Swedish for Sale here in Seattle, and as a travel nurse on their kidney floor. And so I was working a 12-hour day shift, and I had this patient this older gentleman, and I would, this was back in the early 2000s. So I would take him a medicine cup full of medications every day, or twice a day. I didn't do his evening, so it was like 2 or 3 times a day. Like, I would pop out the pills because that was back before we scanned the packaging, and so just of the pills, it was a medicine cup full.
Wow.
Multiple times a day, he would be getting this, and he made the comment to me of, it starts out with 1 pill, and then you're taking more pills to counteract the side effects of that 1 pill.
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
you're taking more pills because then you have increased side effects. And
Mhm.
he was like, that's how it kind of develops into you taking so many pills. And for whatever reason, that like clicked in my brain of like, I don't, I'm part of the system, like I work in that system, but I'm like, personally, like, I don't want to follow and be part of that system. And so it really drove home for me of like how I want to do things differently. And I'm always loved nature. And so it's just a natural path for me to be like, okay, what else is out there? And so I started looking at like herbal medicine and alternative ways of, living and supporting myself. And it's not always been easy, because I was burned out for so many years that it's hard to like do these other extra things.
Yeah.
But I find so much benefit. And in my own practice, I talk a lot about herbs and how to incorporate them, because when I talk to my other friends who are nurses, everyone is on ton of medications, because
Mhm.
they don't sleep well, they have chronic health conditions, because I don't know a nurse that doesn't have chronic health conditions. And
Mhm.
so, like, I see all this pharmaceutical medications, and I'm like, personally, I don't wanna do it, and I wanna give people the education and knowledge that there are alternatives out there that they can use that's not comes in a pill form.
Wow. Wow. So I hear like this inspiration from this patient actually who was going through his own process that inspired you to go, how can I possibly do this differently?
Yeah. And I was in my, like, late 20s at the time, and
Mhm.
so that really started, like, that process of, like, "Oh, I want to do things differently than what I see every day going into work."
Okay. Okay. And did that start right when you started nursing, right when you entered the field, or did it take a while for that to start
That
to?
was probably, like, 5 or 6 years afterwards.
Okay.
So it took a while, because,
Mhm.
you're just used to, like, this is what you do. You give out all these pills and people take them, and then I've had a couple of different patients too. I remember up in Fairbanks, I was doing a travel assignment, and she was a nurse, but she had gone through a surgery, and she was taking arnica
Mm.
arnica and maybe something else because she was refusing the heparin shots. 'Cause she
Mm.
was like, "I'm taking this medication." I told the doctor. Of course, the doctor wrote it, but she every time she was like, "No, I'm not taking that." And I was
Mm.
just like, "Oh, like there's these little incidences of people like doing things differently." And it's almost like it gives you permission to be like, "Oh, like you don't have to like just do what the doctor says because this is the standard because there's a different way of doing things. Like you don't have to just do things by protocol, right?"
Right, right. Yeah, and sometimes it takes a while to get to that point where you can realize you can do things differently.
Mhm.
Especially, I know like when I entered the field, I remember a teacher specifically saying like you have to be in the box before you can be out of the box. You have to understand the box before you can break the box.
Right.
And it's actually really helpful advice for me. So to understand how the system works before I try to do something that's different,
Mm.
then I can kind of navigate both of those worlds.
Yeah, it creates like a deeper understanding of what it is to be
Mhm.
like, and then, but there's different levels to it because you have to understand or realize or know that there's a different way of doing it. Like you don't
Mm.
have to do it like how everyone else has done it. And it's like, and so, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So then this word resilience is, and burnout too, like they're such kind of buzzwords. Like how do you personally define both resilience and burnout? What does that mean for you personally? What does that mean for you when you're working with others?
So to me, resilience is, so my practice I is kind of grounded in the polyvagal theory.
Mm.
And so I talk a lot of there's like three states of your nervous system. There's the hyper aroused, like you're constantly going and like I call that like the type A personality kind of people. And then there's you have a window of tolerance. And that's where your resiliency resides, is that in that window of tolerance where you feel grounded and centered and you have a lot of self-autonomy. Like you can push the boundaries and you can push back and you can set boundaries because you feel very comfortable doing that. Because you feel grounded in yourself. And
Mhm.
then there's the hypo aroused state, which I call like the functional freeze state, which is my kind of go-to and where I spent most of my adulthood is in this functional freeze state. And
Mhm.
so to me, resiliency is having a regulated nervous system where most of the time you're in that window of tolerance. And that means like when stressors happen and you feel activated or shut down, it doesn't mean you don't go to those other states, but you don't sit there in those states. Like you're able to bring yourself back, like you're able to access the tools and the steps and the reasoning to be like, okay, I might feel really shut down because something feels overwhelming and I will, like, disengage, but I don't disengage for, like, days. Like, I
Mm.
disengage for, like, 20 minutes, and then I'm able to move myself back into that window of tolerance. And to
Mhm.
me, that's resiliency because it's not as if things don't affect you. Like, there's not this perfect time where you're just, like, happy and in a Buddhist meditative state all the time, right? But you're able to bring yourself back down. And that's, to me, that's resilience. Like you're able to like think through, you're able to activate processes and your higher thinking to be able to like, okay, I can problem solve this. You're not just reacting to everything. And for me, when I see burnout, people are either in this really hyper state or they're in this really hypo state of their
Mm.
nervous system. And that's where they spend the majority of their time. They're either like really angry and irritable, or they're filling their life full of uh, projects. And but there's never that time to just sit and be and let your nervous system regulate, or you're in this freeze state where you're just in survival mode, you're just getting through every day. And I see that when I was working as a staff nurse, like we're all in this survival mode.
Mm,
And working in a clinic, I would, you come in on Mondays, Sunday afternoons really kind of sucks because everyone's anxiety starts going up Sunday afternoon. And
mm,
then on Monday morning, everyone's like, can't wait for Friday.
mm,
Like, and so you're just in this cycle of not really engaging and enjoying life. You're just in this like survival mode. And to me, that's burnout where you're not really sitting with life and you're not engaging with life. You're just surviving life.
mm,
And I see that in like my former colleagues, and I see that in my clients and people I interact with when I do my workshops. Like you're in survival mode.
mm.
And to me, that's a huge sign of burnout where you're just not present in your life.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah. I love the window of tolerance idea. And I hear like the way that you talk about burnout is like there's almost like two different kinds of burnout. There's the functional freeze burnout, and then there's the like sympathetic go, go, go kind of burnout. And like when you work with people, what does that look like when you're working with, does it look different when you're working with the type A folks versus the functional freeze folks? And what does that look like? And how do you support people to go from, I've definitely been when I've been in a burnout place, like months in functional freeze, right? Not hours, not minutes, but months. Um, and it took me a long time to kind of figure out one that it was happening because when I was so in that dissociated kind of numb place, I knew it didn't feel good, but like I didn't know what actually was happening. So there was like I didn't have awareness of it, but then I also didn't know how to change it because it was like, well, this is just what I do. I get anxious on Sunday. I go to work on Monday. I can't wait till Friday. I collapse. And then it repeat, rinse and repeat. So how do you work with
Yeah.
the window of tolerance around that?
So, first thing I do is an assessment to determine like where, because not every, most people have aspects of both, right? Like when I was working, I was going, 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 even though I was in this like freeze state, but I had these aspects of that hyper state until I kind of hit a wall around the end of the year. And then I was like done, and I'd be like days on the couch. And so when I'm working with people, I do an assessment just to see what their kind of most state is, that where they spend a lot of their time, because then that determines like the different tools to
Mm,
use to move their state either down. So then you're regulating down if you're in this hyper state. So then, for example, if you're always kind of that person who's going, you're taking on 100 projects and you never have time to do yourself for yourself, but you use exercise as a stress reliever, which is a great stress reliever, right? But also it keeps you activated because it's a lot of movement. And so re-looking at the tools that you use to regulate your nervous system down
mm,
is more specific. So you want to do things that bring your system, like more that are more grounding, that kind of bring you back into your body so you're not disassociating and thinking in your head. Like, you have squirrel brain.
mm,
And, or if you're in that functional freeze state, then doing things that bring you up into like that window of tolerance. So doing things like yoga or Tai Chi or just walking or interacting with a supportive community, your friends, things that upregulate yourself.
mm.
And so I think the hardest part though is a lot of symptoms of burnout are normalized.
Yeah.
We think they're part of our personality when they're not part of, like, they're a symptom of a dysregulated nervous system. But especially in our society, it's all normalized. You're right. Like, you're such a go-getter and the type A
Mhm.
personality, and you're doing a million things and you never have time to like not do anything. Or in our culture, you're called lazy, or you're internalized that, oh, I'm lazy if I'm not constantly doing anything, or I don't have a side gig, or I don't have, all these other things to do, right? You're always hustling. Like that's the
Mhm.
new word is you're hustling.
Mm.
And we're not like our nervous system doesn't we're not evolved that way to constantly be doing. But it's you get such good kudos and you're like, oh, this is great. Like I'm always doing things. But our
Mhm.
nervous system's like, no, that's not what I want to do. But you're like, we're trained to do those things. And
Mhm.
so it is hard to realize like that you are burned out. Like I thought it was so normalized for me to be shut down. Like I remember I lived in San Francisco for 6 months and you work your 3 or 4 12-hour shifts, and then I would spend a day just in bed. Like I wasn't really tired, but I was just exhausted. And
Mm.
that was how I recovered and not realizing, but to me that was normal. And for a lot of nurses, that is normal, right? Like you
Mhm.
do your 12s, your 3 or 4 12s. And like I remember like you can do like 5 or 6 12s in a row and then you get like a chunk of time off and that was very normalized.
Yeah.
But then you spend a day or two like wiped out
Mm.
because it's not just the physical aspect, it's the mental. You always have to be on when you're on shift. And so you get decision fatigue and you're like, I don't want to interact with anyone. I don't want to have to make decisions about dinner. I just want to eat whatever's convenient. And so, but it's so normalized. Like
Mm.
and it is hard to, I think, recognize a lot of times that you are having these symptoms and that there's a different way because you're just like, this is who I am, right?
Right.
And this
Mhm.
is how I deal with stress. And our coping skills are also, our maladaptive coping skills are also very uh, normalized.
Mhm.
Like soothe yourself in the moment, but not doing things like meditation or walking, which help regulate yourself and are beneficial in the long term, right?
Mhm.
So um, it's hard because we don't recognize these symptoms.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I didn't for a long time. I was pretty unclear about what that was. So how have you found that people do either come to the awareness or that they are burnt out or it's like something's not working for them or like what are the doorways into realizing like I know for me it was just like for me it was a moment where I was like I'm crying every day after work that doesn't seem good. And that was like my doorway. But it took me a long time to get to that doorway of like, oh wait, I don't think most people cry after work, like every day.
Yeah.
So that was like my wake up call. But like I wonder what it would have been like if I would have had somebody say, hey, like these other things that are happening before you got to that point are leading to this point where it was like a breakout point where I left the field. I couldn't work in the field for a couple of years. Um, but like, how do you find that either you can support people to identify burnout earlier or, yeah, I don't even know. Yeah. Does that make sense, that question?
It does. And it's not an easy question to answer because it looks so different for everyone. So I've developed an assessment quiz
Mm,
because there's a lot of burnout assessment tools out there, but they're also all focused on work. They're like how you engage or disengage with work.
mm,
And I want to assess how the person is in life and not focus on work. Like work is always a piece, especially if you work in healthcare, mental health, or anywhere, right? Like, um, but we're more than our work. And
mhm,
so it is like, I think for a lot of people in healthcare, like there's this understanding that you're probably burned out, but it's hard to recognize it again. And then you have to have the motivation to do something about it because there's also a lot of like hopelessness of like, I can't change the system. If I want to work here, I just have to deal with it. Or burnout is normalized where people will say, well, you should be burned out because you are a nurse, right?
mm,
Like, but I don't, that's not true either,
Mhm.
and, or you should be able to just push through. And that's also not true. Like, it's not normal to have these symptoms. And so I think it is hard to, even if you know you're burned out, to recognize the symptoms of it. And so I developed the burnout assessment quiz, and I have a burnout bingo. So I will go to nurse conferences, and
Okay.
so I have a table, and I wanted to develop something that's kind of fun and kind of cheeky, but also at the same time makes it concrete. Because when
Mm,
you start checking off and you're like checked off half the boxes and you're like, oh, like that's a lot of symptoms,
mm,
it makes it more real, right? Like
mhm,
you can uh, kind of live in denial about a lot of the symptoms because they're like an enigma. They're there, but they're not really that concrete. But when you see something in front of you of like, oh yeah, like there's a lot of these symptoms, I really am burned out.
mm,
It hits differently. And so it's hard because burnout can be so chronic that
mhm,
there's usually a moment of time. Like for me, I was turning 45, and I was like, I don't want to be chronically exhausted. For a for a decade, I had uh, search for energy. Like I was chronically exhausted.
mm,
And I was always doing these things to try to like get more energy in my life because I knew there was more energy. Like I had energy, I just couldn't get it, right? And that was really kind of the turning point of like, I don't want to do this for another 20 years. Like, I don't want to be how I am in my life for another 20 years and do this job. And so that was really kind of my final push to be like, I need to leave. I need to stop working as a staff nurse and like do something very different because and I see that with other people where they're like, okay, like you get so exhausted and you're just barely surviving your day. And it's like, is this how I want to be in another year, another 5 years, another like 10 years? And so there's got to be something that's turned, that's switched on of like, okay, I don't like, there's got to be something different out there. Um, so but it's definitely, it's hard to assess sometimes.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, something else that I run into often is like for folks who, and again, I've experienced myself, like when I'm feeling that kind of high level of burnout, it's like I can tell I know what I should do. I should do yoga. I should eat this way. I should do this. I should get enough sleep. I should drink water, blah, 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 blah. And so then I'm like shitting on myself, which is actually increasing my burnout rather than decreasing it because I'm not doing those things. And I'm mad at myself and beating myself up for not doing them because I should be doing them.
Yeah.
So and then there's like I don't know, and then the like the kind of the like the giving up, like I don't have time for that anyway. And so how do you work with that when that comes up around that it feels like a functional freeze kind of place for me when I've been there of like, or it's actually both, right? It's like the beating myself up because I should be doing all these things that I'm not doing. And then the giving up, well, I can't do it anyway because I'm so burned out.
Right. Yeah, it's hard because there's a lot of shame and guilt around
Mhm.
burnout. Because we know the tools, like people talk about these tools all the time, like, self-care. So
Yeah.
when I talk in my workshop and I talk to clients, I never use the word self-care because there's such a negative connotation to it for nurses. Because
Mm.
they're like, okay, deep breathing is great, but it's not going to get me out of burnout, right? And so there's a lot of like pushback and almost anger directed towards that, like that verbiage.
Yep.
And I get it because I've been there too. And so I talk about like rituals of relaxation. I talk about regulating your nervous system. And um, I'm very clear about not adding any shame or guilt to what we're talking about because there is a lot of shame and guilt because a lot of times you should be doing these things, but it's so hard when you're overwhelmed to do any other thing, even though you know it feels good and it will help you.
Mhm.
Um, and so like I have twice a month, I have these tool integration sessions
Mm.
where we talk about how to integrate these tools into your life. Like it's with the body oiling for me. Like, so instead of using lotion, I use body oil, which helps regulate my nervous system. But it's a daily habit that I use. So, and it's realizing that once you do these things, it's a journey, right? Like these are practices that you can come back to when you find yourself kind of going sideways a little bit,
Mm.
kind of feeling lost, or your stress levels increasing and you're like, what can I go back to that will help me? Because it's that getting into that cycle of guilt and shame and I should be doing these things, just increases you not doing them, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so you get into these cycles where then you're like, well, fuck it. Like, I'm not doing anything and whatever.
Yeah.
And then you just kind of start increasing and sliding into like a deeper um, burnout set or
Hmm.
cycle. I call them cycles. And they can be long cycles, but
Hmm.
they do tend to cycle through. And they feel like they can be forever, but I try to reassure people that there's cycles and there's ending to this cycle.
Mm.
And then it's like when you're on that upswing of like then making those changes to like, okay, how do I, like, you have to kind of almost hit bottom sometimes, and then you're like, okay, I'm done living this way, and then what can I do differently to make changes?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. I'd also want to talk about your transition out of nursing because I also think that again, when I left the field, it was a really big deal to leave that kind of work. And my narrative around it at that time was like, I can't handle this work, which actually wasn't true. I just couldn't handle it doing it in the way that I was doing it. Now
Mhm.
I feel more excited and more passionate about the work every day and every year that I get to be in this field. Um, but it felt really difficult. It felt really painful. There was some shame around it, and it also felt really risky to leave the field. So can you tell me about your process of what that was like, jumping from clinical nursing into what you're doing now?
Yeah, it's hard because, and I'm sure you may have experienced this too, it becomes part of your personality to do what
Hmm.
you're doing. And not even just working as a nurse, but working as a pediatric nurse. Every
Mm.
time you tell someone, oh, yeah, I work at the pediatric hospital, they're like, oh my God, that's so great. And you do such good work. And so it becomes part of who you are. And
Mm.
so for about the 3 to 5 years before I actually ended up quitting, I knew I couldn't, I was on my way of getting out. Like I was trying to figure out how to get out of nursing because it is like you make good money, you have decent benefits, like it becomes who you are, like the profession becomes intertwined with who you are. And so for the time before I quit, I started unraveling like who I was outside of nursing. Like who am
Mm.
I without that label of being a nurse? And you have to kind of work through that a little bit because if you're no longer considered a nurse, like who are you? And that, and I'd been working with a friend to start figuring out how to do a wellness coaching business even before I ended up quitting. Because that's what nurses do in general. Like we educate and we coach, we just don't call it that, right? And
Mhm.
so I had already like started these small steps before I hit my final wall and was like, I can't do this for another 20 years. And so so there was already like cracks in that wall of like, I can't leave. But I see that a lot with a lot of nurses where like you're making good money, you have job security, and it's really scary to jump off and do something very different.
Yeah.
And it's hard. Like it's it's hard to make that change because you're going from the known, even if it's hell, like it's a known hell,
Mm.
into the unknown of you don't know what, like you don't have that safety necessarily. And you see that a lot in nursing going from inpatient, because inpatient is considered nursing, bedside. That's considered your regular nursing.
Mm.
And even going into the clinic can be different because you're not necessarily seen as like a real nurse because
Mm.
you're not at that bedside. So there's a lot of stigma to that. And then there's a lot of stigma even of like leaving that, like leaving a clinic nurse job, because that's still within the realm of a regular nurse. And so there's a lot of stigma that people have to work through in order to like make those changes when you're leaving or changing jobs or shifting your focus. And it's definitely hard, and there's a lot of internal work that you have to end up doing because you have to be okay with not having that set expectation of being a bedside nurse or like an
Mm.
ICU or an ER nurse or any of those like typical like jobs, nursing jobs.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, yeah. Like, yeah, that identity can keep us
mhm.
entrenched in something. Even I appreciate what you said about the known hell is sometimes more comfortable and familiar than the unknown uncertainty. It's like that, like jumping off the cliff moment of like, oh, it's really scary here, but what could happen? A
Right.
question that I ask myself a lot is like, from it's the same question, but it's like my orientation of like, what could happen? It's like this sense of like curiosity and wonder versus like, what's gonna happen? Right.
Right. Like I am actually really thankful that I did quit and I started my own business. Like I've reignited my passion. Like like I've always been an advocate for nurses when I
Mm.
worked as a staff nurse, but now I feel like my passion is like deeper and reignited, and I feel even more passionate about nursing and helping other nurses. And I wouldn't have that if I was working as a staff nurse. And I've met so many different people that I would never have engaged with. And it's amazing. Like, and I feel more engaged with my local community because of that. I'm in the Chamber of Commerce. And so I meet and engage with other small businesses that I would never know existed if I hadn't done this path. And it's so I it feels so fulfilling to be like, oh, this is awesome.
Mhm.
And it's just engaging in life a lot differently.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. It's amazing what can come from like taking those risks and taking
Hmm.
those vulnerable steps where you're like, I don't know what's going to happen, but let's
Right.
see.
Yeah, because when you're working like a 9 to 5 kind of job where you're working for someone else, you're just kind of working towards retirement and you're kind of in that same rut.
Yep.
And now, not that being an entrepreneur is for everyone, but it feels like the road just kind of opened and
Mm.
there's all these different possibilities that I never knew existed.
Yeah.
And that's
So
actually
cool.
amazing.
So cool. That's so cool.
I mean, it's scary at the same time because but at the same time, like who knows, like who you meet and where things go. And yeah, it's like these connections, like how we connected. Like I
Mhm.
knew someone who knew you, and then
Yep.
here we are. And you never know how like those paths weave in and out with each other.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel like my business has been such a teacher for me in so many ways. I mean, burnout was a huge teacher for me too. Like I wouldn't be here if I didn't experience burnout. So I'm grateful for that experience, even though it was hell going through it. Um, but I think that's something that also has kind of developed through my own practices too, of like having gratitude for even the challenges that arise, because there's some like learning that comes out of it, even through the really difficult experiences.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
not that I would ever say like, oh, I wish that would have happened. And it did happen. And so how can I use that within my window of tolerance to learn about my nervous system and how I approach things and how I want to do things differently next time and all of that. So it's such
Well,
a,
and that's the big thing is using it as a learning experience and
mm,
how it informs you currently of like, how do I do things differently so I don't get into that depth of burnout like I was before. Like I've been there. I don't want to go there again. And that's also motivating,
mm,
right? Because if you don't have a motivator to like do these practices, then you're not going to end up doing them. It's harder to sustain them. So,
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, that's actually a perfect kind of segue into, is there a practice that you want to share with us that can foster planting our seeds deeply in the earth so we can reach into the possibilities of the sky?
yes. So actually, I think the biggest advice is to do something that you can make it into a habit of doing. And so, you know, um, for me, I've always been very envious of people who can like sit and meditate and they have a meditation practice and they do it every day, right? But I get scroll brain and I've never been able to like just sit and meditate. And so, some of the biggest practices or the most consistent practices that I do is one, I garden. And so I get outside, I pay attention to what my plants are doing. It's a very grounding experience to like, you're not just walking through the yard. I'm paying attention to like what's growing and what's not growing and watering things. And so doing something every day that just grounds you, and then the other piece is um, I do cold water immersion is like, there's science behind it and how it grounds you and helps you regulate. But when you're in burnout, it's hard to do because it dysregulates your nervous system. So like I started doing right after my shower, like I turn the water, not even just freezing cold, but it's a lot cooler. And
Mhm.
that feels very grounding to me. Um, and so it's just these little practices that you can incorporate into what you're already doing that are going to be the most sustaining and the most helpful. If you have to, when you're in that chronic state of overwhelm and you have to like find even just 10 minutes to sit and meditate, it's going to be so hard to
Mhm.
actually do it. But if you can incorporate these tools into what you're already doing, then you're already halfway there. You just like, make it a little bit more mindful or just um you're just doing it a little bit differently than like going through the motions, right? And that's
Mhm.
I think a big piece is like not feel like you're just going through the motions of doing it, but you're actually incorporating it into what you're doing and you're like thoughtful about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that. And there's something that I actually offer on the YouTube channel of micro practices. And so I think of those as like something that we can do in 5 minutes or less. That is like I'll say like if you're not meditating every day, like most likely you're not going to start, meditate for 30 minutes twice a day. That's not going to be the thing. But can you take 5 breaths before, like one of my practices is after I have a meal, I just take 5 breaths and just like it's like a mindfulness check. It's not even a meditation. It's like just what's happening in this body and this system before I transition into whatever is next. And so having these like little touchstones throughout
Mhm.
the day that can be like so small, but so powerful.
Right. I remember, so I'm a tea drinker.
Uh-huh.
And I remember one morning, so I drink Earl Grey tea in the morning. I don't do coffee. And I remember one time I was super burned out, but I was just like the smell and the scent of the Earl Grey as I'm drinking it, that really became my like mindfulness practice right there. And so especially if you can take something that you're already doing, like you're already eating, take
Right.
5 breaths afterwards, just to like recenter instead of like jumping off and doing all
Mm,
these other things, right? It's just like slowing down in the day a little bit, even when you feel like you can't. But
mhm,
there's little tweaks. And I like the idea of like the micro practices because it's doing these things frequently enough that they just become habit.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Cool. Well, let's actually just do that. Let's take 5 breaths together before we close up our time. So I'm going to close my eyes. You're welcome to. You can keep your eyes open. And as you take in these 5 breaths, just notice what landed with you. How's your body responding? What's happening in your breath? Where's your mind at right now? Mm. Nice. Well, thank you so much, Doris. This was such a lovely experience to talk with you and to share with you and to learn from you. Is there anything you want to make sure people know about what you do or what you offer?
Yeah, so I offer a monthly workshop on burnout with the intention of reframing of what people think keeps them in burnout, and then giving them tools to work and utilize and get out of burnout. And then I've just started a quarterly webinar series where I talk about sleep. So picking apart some of the hot topics. So I talk about sleep because that's a big thing. People just don't sleep very well. I also have a 6-week program that I just launched on sleep because
Cool.
it's a hard thing for people to get. So I'll do the webinars will be on sleep and then herbal medicine,
Mm.
specifically talking about herbs for chaos and overwhelm and like how to support yourself through those. So yeah, and then I have a personal practice with personal coaching. Um, that's online, and yeah, I just it's exciting, and I'm super happy to be here and in this space and doing the work I'm doing, and that I was able to meet you and we were able to do this. This is great. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great. Well, I'll put all those links in the description so people can easily find you. And thank you so much for taking this time. I really
yeah.
appreciate it. I look forward to our next conversation.
Yes, me too. This is very lovely. Thank you.
You're welcome.